The rain had been falling for hours, tapping relentlessly against the cracked windows of a small apartment at the edge of the city. Each drop sounded like a countdown, a slow, merciless rhythm echoing through the silence of an empty room. Amara sat in the dark, her graduation cap still resting on her lap. The golden tassel, once a symbol of pride, now looked dull under the flickering streetlight seeping through the blinds. Her fingers trembled as she stared at her phone's screen. One new message. It wasn't from her parents. It was from her class group. "Congrats, everyone! Family dinner tonight?" Amara stared blankly, her chest tightening. For everyone else, tonight was a celebration, laughter, proud parents, endless photos. But for her, it was the night she'd realized that family could abandon you even when you needed them most. The empty apartment, the living room, was filled with reminders of the life. She was supposed to have framed photos of her parents smiling at her 10th birthday. Her mother's soft perfume lingering faintly in the air. A cracked mug her father used to drink coffee from before work. But those were just ghosts now, fragments of a family that had already emotionally left her long before physically doing it. Amara's graduation gown was still damp from the rain as she whispered to herself, "They'll come. They promised they would." Her phone vibrated again, this time a text from her father. "Dad, don't wait for us, something came up. You'll understand one day." That was it. No congratulations, no love. Just another excuse, cold, efficient, final. She read it again, and again, until the words blurred behind a curtain of tears. A knock in the rain, there was a knock at the door. Amara wiped her face and forced herself to stand. Her heart thumped against her chest, a small spark of hope igniting inside her. Maybe it was them. Maybe they changed their minds. Maybe they remembered. She opened the door. It wasn't her parents. It was Mrs. Patel, their old neighbor, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a plastic umbrella that struggled against the wind. "Amara, they've gone," Mrs. Patel said softly. "They left this afternoon. I saw the moving truck." The words hit her harder than the rain outside. "Gone," Amara whispered, her voice cracking. "Where?" Mrs. Patel looked away. "They didn't say, just packed up and left. I thought you were going with them." For a moment, Amara's entire world went silent. The wind howled in the distance, the thunder rolled across the sky, but all she could hear was her heartbeat, uneven, breaking, desperate. Her parents had left. On the night of her graduation, without a goodbye. The last memory Amara's mind replayed the last conversation she'd had with them a week ago. Her father, distant as ever, had said, "We've done what we could for you. Now it's time you learn to live on your own." Her mother hadn't said anything, just stood there, eyes full of a guilt she never voiced. At the time, Amara thought it was tough love. Now, she realized it was a farewell disguised as advice. The phone slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. She didn't even flinch. Her entire body felt numb, like grief had frozen her veins. Flashback. The reason they left Amara wasn't the perfect daughter. At least, that's what her father used to tell her. "You're too emotional," he'd say. "You think too small," her mother would add, adjusting her pearl earrings. They were ambitious people, chasing success, status, and reputation. And Amara, she was the opposite. She cared more about sketchbooks than business meetings, more about helping her friends than earning praise. That difference had built invisible walls between them for years. But she never thought those walls would become a permanent border. The breakdown when Mrs. Patel left, Amara locked the door and slid down against it. She could hear the rain hammering harder outside, like the world itself was mourning for her. Her voice came out in a whisper, broken, trembling, almost childlike. "Why wasn't I enough?" No one answered. She screamed. The sound filled the tiny apartment and bounced off the empty walls, but it changed nothing. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. She picked up a photo from the table, her family on vacation, smiles perfectly rehearsed for the camera. She stared at it for a long time before hurling it against the wall. Glass shattered, and for the first time that night, she felt something other than pain, anger. It burned quietly at first, but deep down, something darker began to stir. The promise hours later, the storm subsided. The city fell into a strange calm, the kind that feels like the aftermath of destruction. Amara stood by the window, her reflection barely visible in the rain-streaked glass. Her eyes were red, but behind them was something new: determination. "They'll see me again," she whispered. "Not as the girl they left behind, but as the woman they'll regret losing." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, one made in silence, sealed by tears and born from betrayal. The symbol before dawn, she took off her graduation gown, folded it neatly, and placed it on the kitchen counter. She picked up her old sketchbook, the one her mother used to call a waste of time, and flipped to a blank page. She drew 3 figures, a father, a mother, and a girl standing apart from them. Then she drew a wall between them, tall, cold, and unbreakable. Underneath it, she wrote 4 words that would define the years to come. "I'll make them remember." The morning light crept through the blinds, touching her face gently. It was a new day, but for Amara, it was also the beginning of a reckoning. 10 years. A decade since the night Amara's world had ended, and quietly, she'd built another one from its ashes. The city had changed since then, gleaming under the weight of ambition and steel. Glass towers kissed the clouds, and the streets below pulsed with life. Taxis honking, neon lights blinking, laughter echoing from rooftop bars. But one building stood above them all: the Lucent Hall, a palace of chandeliers and marble, reserved for the wealthy elite. Tonight, it glittered brighter than ever. Inside, a reunion was being held, a gathering of influential figures who'd once been college friends. Among them, her parents. The invitation, the envelope, had arrived a month ago, sealed in gold. The alumni reunion of St. Clarion's class of 2015. Inside the envelope was a small note, handwritten, delicate, and almost ironic. "We'd be honored by your presence, Miss Amara Devereux, founder of Aria Designs." When she read it, she didn't smile. She didn't cry. She only traced her finger over her new name, Devereux, a name she'd chosen herself. Elegant, distant, and unrecognizable. No one knew who she really was, not anymore. The transformation gone was the timid girl with rain-soaked hair and trembling hands. Amara had become a woman who carried silence like a weapon. Her confidence didn't shout, it whispered. Her walk was deliberate, her gaze steady, her voice low and composed. Tonight, as she stood before her mirror, she fastened a diamond earring and examined her reflection. Her black gown clung to her frame, sophisticated but understated. Her hair, once wild and unkempt, was now tied in a sleek bun. She wasn't just attending a reunion. She was attending an execution, one disguised as civility. Arrival at Lucent Hall, the doorman opened the grand doors, and a wave of laughter and music spilled into the night air. Inside, the ballroom shimmered golden light cascading over crystal chandeliers, tables lined with champagne, and faces that hadn't aged gracefully under the weight of privilege. As Amara entered, heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. She moved like a shadow gliding through light, her heels clicking in rhythm with the string quartet's soft melody. Whispers followed her. "Who's that?" "She looks familiar." "Aria Designs? Isn't she the architect who rebuilt the Skyline Theater?" No one recognized her, not yet. But across the room, 2 figures did glance in her direction, sensing something they couldn't name. Her parents. The parents, Evelyn and Richard Patel, still the perfect couple, or so it seemed. They were laughing with their circle of friends, dressed in luxury that screamed success. Evelyn's pearls gleamed under the chandelier. Richard's voice boomed with confidence as he recounted stories from their humble days. To anyone watching, they were admirable. But to Amara, they were ghosts wearing masks. As she approached the center of the room, Evelyn's laughter faltered. Her eyes met Amara's across the crowd, a flicker of confusion. Recognition, almost. But Amara looked away, smiling faintly as if they were strangers. The encounter, the event host, an old classmate named Jordan, stepped up to the stage with a glass of champagne. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate not only friendship but the success that time has brought each of us. And speaking of success, we have a special guest here. Someone whose name has been lighting up design magazines across the world, Miss Amara Devereux." Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed. Amara took the stage with calm grace. She smiled, polite, composed, but her eyes were cold fire. "Thank you," she said softly into the microphone. "It's surreal to be here, among faces that once belonged to yesterday." A few chuckles, but she wasn't joking. Her gaze swept the crowd and lingered for a split second on her parents. Richard's jaw tightened. Evelyn's hand trembled against her glass. Amara continued, her tone turning faintly sharp. Success, I've learned, isn't built from privilege or guidance, but from absence, from silence, from learning how to survive when no one comes for you. The room went quiet. Even the music seemed to hesitate. She smiled again, this time almost kindly. To those who believed in me and to those who left me behind, thank you. You both made me who I am. Then she raised her glass. To survival. A slow, uncertain applause followed. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others admired her confidence without understanding the meaning beneath her words. But her parents understood. They looked as if they'd seen a ghost. After the speech, when the applause died and the chatter resumed, Amara stepped off stage. Her heels clicked softly on marble as she made her way to the balcony. Outside, the city lights shimmered below like constellations trapped in glass. The night wind brushed her face. She closed her eyes, breathing in the moment, steadying herself. This was just the beginning. Behind her, the ballroom doors opened. Footsteps approached. A familiar voice, careful and low, spoke. Amara, she turned. Her mother stood there, pale and trembling. I didn't know you'd be here. Amara smiled, small, almost gentle. You invited me. Evelyn swallowed. I didn't recognize the name. Of course you didn't, Amara said softly. You never really looked at me, even when you lived with me. Evelyn flinched. The silence between them was thick, charged, unspoken history pressing against every word. I wanted to come back for you, Evelyn said suddenly. You have to believe me. Amara's gaze hardened. No, you wanted to forget me, and you did. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. We made mistakes. Amara stepped closer, her voice calm but deadly quiet. You didn't make mistakes, Mother, you made choices. The father's arrival, Richard, appeared at the doorway, tension stiffening his posture. Evelyn, come inside. Then his gaze met Amara's. The moment stretched, 2 decades of silence colliding in one glance. I see you've done well for yourself, he said finally. Amara tilted her head. I learned from the best. You taught me how to pretend everything's fine. A pause, his jaw clenched. We did what we thought was right. No, she said quietly. You did what was easier. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The wind carried faint echoes of the party behind them, laughter, music, the sound of champagne glasses clinking. Amara turned away. Enjoy your reunion, Mr. Patel. I wouldn't want to interrupt your performance. And with that, she walked past them, her perfume lingering like smoke, her heels fading down the marble corridor. Evelyn's lips parted. Richard, that was her. He didn't answer. He only watched her vanish into the crowd, his reflection caught in the glass like a man haunted by his own past. The final image outside, Amara descended the grand staircase, her car waiting at the curb. She paused before getting in, looking up one last time at the glowing windows of Lucent Hall. Through the glass, she could see silhouettes, her parents, frozen, watching her. She smiled faintly, whispered to herself, You remember me now. Then she stepped into the car, and the night swallowed her whole. The city's skyline shimmered beneath a pale moon as Amara's car sliced through the midnight streets. Inside, silence wrapped around her like armor. Her reflection in the tinted window looked calm, almost serene, but beneath that stillness was something dangerous. She had seen their faces again, her parents, and they had seen her. It should have been enough, but it wasn't. Forgiveness was a gift, and Amara had no intention of giving it. The plan begins for years. She'd prepared for this. Not consciously, perhaps, but every sleepless night, every tear that hardened into resolve had been part of the architecture of her revenge. After her parents abandoned her, Amara had worked relentlessly, designing buildings for people who never noticed her until they needed her. But through every blueprint, every project, she'd built something else too. Connections. Powerful ones. Investors, business elites, journalists, even politicians who owed her favors. And now she would use them not for money, not for fame, but for justice cloaked in elegance. Her parents didn't know it yet, but they were about to watch their perfect empire crumble piece by piece, without ever realizing who was behind it. Flashback. The ghost years there had been years when she'd wanted nothing but to disappear. The loneliness had nearly swallowed her whole. She'd lived in cheap apartments, taken odd design jobs, and eaten noodles for weeks at a time. But pain had taught her discipline. Isolation had taught her clarity. By 28, she had launched her own architecture firm, Aria Designs, named after the silence that once haunted her. The company grew fast. Her ideas were bold, human, empathetic, the opposite of her parents' cold, business-minded world. By 30, she'd rebuilt her life from nothing. And by 32, she was powerful enough to buy silence itself. Present. The invitation the morning after the reunion, Amara sat at her desk overlooking the skyline. The sunlight filtered through glass walls, painting gold across her office. Her assistant, Claire, stepped in. "You asked me to look into Richard and Evelyn Patel's company," she said, placing a folder on the table. "You're not going to believe this." Amara didn't look surprised. "I usually do." Claire opened the file. "Their company, Patel Enterprises, is in serious trouble. They've been moving money between shell accounts. Someone's been covering up bad investments." Amara smiled faintly, her fingers tapping the glass desk. Desperation always leaves a trail. "Should I notify the authorities?" Claire asked carefully. Amara shook her head. "Not yet. Let them build their house of cards a little higher. The fall will be more spectacular." Claire hesitated. "You sound like you've got history with them." Amara's gaze turned distant. "You could say they once taught me how to build and destroy." The unexpected message later that evening, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, Evelyn. "Please meet me, I just want to talk." Amara stared at it for a long moment. Her chest tightened, a flicker of old emotion. Then she locked the screen and placed the phone down without replying. But the message haunted her, not because she wanted to see Evelyn, because she needed to know why her mother had reached out after all these years. The cafe meeting 2 days later, Amara found herself standing outside a small cafe near the old university campus. It was quiet, tucked away between bookstores and forgotten trees, a place that smelled like time and regret. Inside, Evelyn sat at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea. Her pearls were gone, her makeup lighter. For the first time, she looked human, fragile even. When Amara entered, Evelyn's eyes widened, relief and guilt warring behind them. "You came," Evelyn whispered. Amara sat down across from her. "Curiosity, not forgiveness." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's fair." She took a shaky breath. "You look strong." "I had to be," Amara said softly. "You weren't there when I needed to be weak." Evelyn flinched. The words sliced cleanly. "I tried to find you, Amara," she said. "Your father didn't want—" "Stop." Amara's voice was calm but cutting. "Don't make him your shield. You had a choice. You always did." Silence fell. The ticking of the cafe clock filled the space between them. Finally, Evelyn whispered, "I regret it every day. Leaving you, watching the car drive away that night, I thought my heart would stop." Amara studied her mother's trembling hands, her eyes wet and unsteady. For a brief, fleeting second, something inside her softened. Then she remembered the years of silence, the nights she cried herself to sleep, the hunger, the shame, the loneliness. She leaned forward slightly. "Regret doesn't erase what you did. You made a home without me. Now I'm just returning the favor." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to do this." Amara smiled faintly. "Oh, Mother, I already have." The silent setup that evening, back in her penthouse, Amara stood by the window overlooking the city lights. The reflection of her mother's face lingered in her memory, fragile, desperate. But she couldn't afford weakness. Not now. She turned toward her computer. The screen glowed softly as she opened a file project mirror. It was her private operation, one designed to expose the corruption inside Patel Enterprises. Anonymous leaks, media whispers, financial audits triggered from nowhere. One click. That's all it would take to begin the unraveling. Her finger hovered over the key, then she stopped. In her mind, she heard her mother's trembling voice again. "You don't have to do this." Amara closed her eyes. The past clawed at her like a ghost. But then she remembered her father's words. "You'll understand one day." Her lips curved into a cold smile. "Yes, Father," she whispered. "I finally do." And she pressed the key. The fallout begins 2 days later. Headlines began to appear across major business sites. Patel Enterprises under investigation for financial misconduct. Anonymous whistleblower leaks confidential files. The empire her parents had built for decades began to shake. Investors panicked. The board turned against them. Amara watched it unfold from her office, expression unreadable. Claire rushed in. "This is insane. Everyone's saying Patel Enterprises is collapsing. Did you?" Amara interrupted gently. "Claire, sometimes the past needs to burn before something better can rise." Claire blinked. "You sound like you've done this before." Amara smiled faintly. "In a way, I have." The end of the chapter that night, alone in her penthouse, she poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window. Outside, the city was alive, glowing, unaware of the private war being fought among its towers. Amara raised her glass to the skyline. "To silence," she whispered, "and to the sound of it breaking." As the lights flickered in the distance, she felt no joy, no victory, only the calm before the next storm because she knew her father. He wouldn't go down quietly, and she was ready for whatever came next. The world was watching. Within 48 hours, Patel Enterprises had gone from a symbol of stability to a crumbling fortress under siege. The morning headlines screamed betrayal, fraud, and cover-ups. Stock prices nosedived. News anchors dissected every rumor, and cameras flashed outside the Patel mansion, gates like vultures waiting for a final breath. For Richard Patel, it was humiliation dressed as justice. The empire in freefall Richard sat at his mahogany desk, his jaw tight, eyes bloodshot. The TV in front of him replayed the same headline. Anonymous source exposes Patel Enterprises' secret offshore accounts. He slammed the remote down. "Lies," he muttered. "All lies." Evelyn stood near the window, hands trembling. "Richard, they're saying there's evidence, documents, emails. You have to face it." He turned sharply toward her. "You think I did this? I think someone wants to destroy you." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Richard's anger faltered for a heartbeat. He rubbed his temples. "Who would do this, Evelyn? Who could hate us this much?" Her silence was the only answer he needed. "Don't say it," he warned, but she did anyway. "Amara!" The name fell between them like a curse. The realization Richard froze. Memories flickered, the night they left her, the text he sent, the guilt he buried under ambition. He'd watched her grow quieter, smaller, more invisible each year until it became convenient to pretend she didn't exist. But now she existed again, louder than ever. "She doesn't have that kind of power," he said finally, though the tremor in his voice betrayed the fear behind the words. Evelyn turned, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You saw her at the reunion. You heard what she said. Every word was a warning, Richard." He paced the room, his mind racing. "No, if she wanted revenge, she'd have come for us directly. This is something else." But deep down, he knew this was her language. Quiet, calculated, poetic. The daughter he'd underestimated had learned to destroy in silence. Meanwhile, Amara's apartment across the city, Amara sat on her balcony overlooking the skyline. The wind carried the faint echo of sirens and city noise, but her mind was elsewhere. On the table beside her lay a newspaper with the headline she had engineered. She traced the photo of her father with one finger, the proud, stern man now cornered and broken. Her lips curved slightly. "You taught me to be ruthless, father," she murmured. "I just learned faster than you expected." But as she leaned back in her chair, a wave of something unexpected washed over her. Guilt. Not pity, not mercy. Guilt. The image of her mother crying in the cafe returned, her trembling hands wrapped around that cup of untouched tea. Amara exhaled deeply. "Don't feel sorry for them," she whispered to herself. "They didn't for you." Still, the ache in her chest refused to fade. The counterattack 2 days later, Claire burst into Amara's office, pale and breathless. "They're fighting back," she said. "Patel Enterprises just released a statement naming Arya Designs as part of a false corporate sabotage claim. They're calling it a vendetta." Amara looked up slowly, unfazed. "Of course they are. They've hired investigators too," Claire continued. "Private ones if they connect the dots." "They won't," Amara interrupted. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "I've been erasing myself from their world for 10 years. I know how to stay invisible." But even as she spoke, a small seed of unease rooted itself in her mind. Her father wasn't a fool. He was a strategist, the kind who turned pressure into opportunity. The confrontation that evening, Amara returned to her penthouse. The air inside felt heavy, almost charged. She turned on the lights and froze. Someone had been there. A faint scent of cologne lingered, the same kind her father used to wear. On her dining table sat a single object, a family photograph, cracked at the corner. The one she'd thrown against the wall the night they left her. Her stomach tightened. He'd been here. There was also a note, handwritten in bold, sharp strokes. "You're not invisible, Amara. Let's talk." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her pulse raced, her thoughts splintered. He knew. Not everything, perhaps, but enough to challenge her. She picked up the note, feeling the weight of the ink beneath her fingers. He wanted a meeting. He wanted control. He wanted to remind her that he still held power over her, or so he thought. Amara smiled faintly. "You just stepped into my game, father." The meeting, they met the next evening in his private office at the family mansion. The same. The storm outside had returned, the same kind of rain that had once fallen the night Amara's parents left her. Only this time, it wasn't just the sky breaking apart. It was her world. Inside the mansion's grand hall, the lights flickered under the weight of thunder. The guests had all gone. The laughter, the toasts, the shallow admiration, all of it had evaporated, leaving only the sound of rain tapping against glass. And in the center of it all stood Amara, her face pale but composed, her black dress soaked from the chaos that had just unfolded. The reunion had turned into a battlefield. The aftermath of exposure moments ago, Amara had revealed everything. The company's forged accounts, the hidden debts, the illegal deals her father had made to protect his reputation. In front of his lifelong friends, investors, and media partners, she had torn open the truth. Now, the echoes of that moment still clung to the air like smoke after a fire. Her father, Rajesh Khanna, sat on the stairs, his face ashen, his trembling hands gripping a crystal glass he hadn't yet realized was empty. Her mother, Mira, stood in disbelief, mascara running down her cheeks, lips quivering as if caught between apology and rage. You planned this," Mira whispered, stepping forward. "All this time, every word, every visit, it was all part of this." Amara didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were cold, unreadable. "You wanted to forget me. I wanted to make sure the world never forgets you." Mira's expression shattered. "You've destroyed us." Amara tilted her head slightly, the ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. "No, Mother, you destroyed yourselves. I just showed everyone the truth." The crack in her armor silence stretched between them. Only the storm spoke now, wind howling through the open balcony doors. Then, from behind her, a voice cut through the tension. "Amara, stop this." It was Rayan, the only person who had ever managed to reach the real her beneath the layers of revenge and restraint. His shirt was torn from the scuffle that had broken out earlier between her father's guards and the guests. His eyes burned with desperation. "Enough," he said again, stepping closer. "You've won, look at them, there's nothing left to prove." She turned slowly, her expression flickering, anger, pain, confusion, all warring behind her steady mask. "You don't understand, Rayan. They left me to rot. I begged them to come back and they turned away. You think one night of exposure is enough to make up for 10 years of silence?" His voice softened. "I understand pain, Amara, but this," he gestured around the ruined hall, "this isn't justice, it's punishment, and you're burning yourself with it." Her breath hitched, but she didn't look away. "Maybe I deserve to burn." Flashback. The letter she never sent in that instant, her mind drifted, unbidden, to the letter she'd written years ago, the one she'd never mailed. "Dear Mom, I got the job I told you about. It's not much, but it's mine. I thought maybe you'd be proud. Maybe you'd write back. Maybe you'd just say my name again." She had folded that letter and placed it in a box filled with others just like it, one for every year they were gone. Letters of hope, letters of forgiveness, letters that slowly turned into rage. "If I can't have your love," one of the later ones had said, "I'll make sure you feel my absence the way I felt yours." The confrontation, her father finally rose to his feet. He looked older than ever, not because of his age, but because the weight of exposure had stripped away his pride. "You think this makes you strong," Rajesh said hoarsely. "You think this makes you better than us." Amara's voice was quiet but steady. "No, it makes me free." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Free? You'll never be free, Amara. You're chained to your hate. And one day, when you realize that, there will be no one left to save you." For a moment, her composure cracked. Her lips trembled. She wanted to scream that she hadn't wanted this, that all she'd ever wanted was to be seen, loved, remembered. But she didn't. She straightened her spine and looked him in the eye. "I didn't come here for your forgiveness," she said. "I came to return what you gave me, emptiness." Mira's breakdown Mira stepped closer, tears falling freely now. "We didn't mean to leave you forever, we thought." Her voice broke. "We thought you'd be fine, you were always strong." Amara's laugh was sharp and cold. "Strong? You called abandonment strength?" Mira's hand shook as she reached out, touching Amara's cheek like she was afraid she'd vanish. "We made a mistake, a terrible one. I see that now. But please, don't let this destroy you." For the first time, Amara's expression softened, just slightly. She stared at her mother's trembling hand, remembering how warm those same hands had felt when they braided her hair before school years ago. For a heartbeat, she wanted to lean into the touch. Then thunder cracked outside and she stepped back. "It already has," she whispered. The betrayal of love Rayan moved toward her again. "Amara, listen to me. You're not alone. You don't have to carry this anymore." But as he reached for her, a movement behind him caught her eye, one of her father's men, holding a gun, aimed directly at Rayan. Everything slowed. The world collapsed into a blur of motion and sound. The click of the trigger, Rayan's startled expression, the deafening bang. Amara screamed. Rayan fell. Time froze. Blood pooled on the marble floor, spreading toward her trembling feet. Her heart pounded, her breath caught in her throat. The man with the gun dropped it, terrified. Her father shouted something she couldn't hear. All she could see was Rayan, lying still, his eyes flickering weakly toward her. "Don't let it end like this," he whispered. The collapse, she fell beside him, clutching his hand. "Stay with me, please, Rayan, stay with me." His blood stained her hands, her dress, her face, a crimson reflection of the life she'd tried to build out of vengeance. He looked at her one last time, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "You're more than this, remember that." Then the light in his eyes dimmed, and in that moment, something inside Amara shattered completely. The walls she'd built, the anger she'd clung to, the purpose that had kept her alive, it all crumbled. All that remained was grief, raw, violent, consuming. She screamed, and it echoed through the hall, mixing with the sound of rain and thunder, a sound not of victory, but of loss. Aftermath hours later, the police arrived. The mansion was chaos, flashing lights, broken glass, whispers of scandal. Rajesh and Mira were taken away for questioning, their empire now crumbling under the weight of Amara's revelation. But she didn't care. She sat on the marble steps, staring at the rain-soaked driveway, Rayan's blood still on her hands. Every drop of rain that hit her face felt like judgment. Mrs. Patel's voice echoed in her memory. "They've gone, child." She'd spent 10 years chasing that departure. Now everyone was gone again by her own doing. Epilogue of the chapter. The price by dawn, Amara stood alone in the empty hall. The storm had passed, leaving a gray, heavy silence in its wake. She walked toward the shattered mirror hanging near the staircase. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman unrecognizable from the girl who once waited for her parents' love. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. Instead, she whispered softly to herself, almost like a confession. "I wanted justice, but I traded my soul for revenge." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, the last letter she had ever written to her parents. Without reading it, she tore it in half and let the pieces fall to the floor. Then she turned and walked out into the rain alone, but finally honest with herself. "Some wounds don't bleed on the skin," they echo in silence. The rain had stopped by morning, but the city still felt drenched in grief. Mist clung to the streets like a ghost refusing to leave, and the first rays of sunlight struggled to pierce through the clouds, as if even the sky was reluctant to move on from what had happened. Amara walked through that silence, her black coat heavy with rain, her shoes echoing softly against the empty pavement. Behind her, the mansion stood like a broken monument, windows shattered, banners torn, police tape fluttering weakly in the breeze. The echoes of last night still haunted its walls. She didn't look back. Not yet. The walk of consequences, every step she took felt heavier than the last. The media had already caught wind of the scandal. Business tycoon and wife arrested for fraud and corruption. Daughter exposes them at gala. Her name was everywhere now, but none of it felt like victory. The people who had once ignored her were now obsessed with her story. The forgotten daughter, the avenger, the betrayed child turned destroyer. Amara could almost hear the voices whispering behind her as she passed by a cafe with the morning news on the screen. She's the one who ruined them. They say she planned it for years. Can you imagine the hate it takes to do that? She pulled her hood tighter. She wasn't afraid of being recognized. She was afraid of being remembered for the wrong reasons. The cemetery of regret by noon. She reached the cemetery. The rain had turned the earth soft, her shoes sinking slightly into the mud as she walked among the rows of gravestones. It wasn't Rayan's grave. His burial hadn't happened yet. But somehow this place felt right. She knelt near a small, weather-worn stone belonging to a child, someone she'd never met. The name was almost faded. Maybe that was why she stopped there. Maybe she understood what it meant to be forgotten. For a long time, she didn't speak. The silence was sacred. Then, finally, she whispered, "I don't know how to ask for forgiveness." Her voice trembled. "I thought revenge would free me. I thought if they hurt like I did, maybe the pain would stop. But it didn't. It just changed shape." The wind moved softly through the trees like a sigh. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about her parents or their lies or her own anger. She was just still. Flashback. The night before in her mind, she saw Rayan again, his eyes, the way he smiled even when things went wrong, the way he'd always told her, "You can't fix pain by spreading it." She remembered their last conversation, weeks before the reunion. "Rayan, if you get what you want, if they lose everything, will it bring you peace?" Amara, "No, but maybe it'll stop the noise in my head." Rayan, "Revenge doesn't quiet the noise, Amara. It just changes the song." She hadn't understood him then. Now, standing in the midst of forgotten graves, she finally did. The police station by evening, Amara walked into the police station. It wasn't surrender, not exactly. It was acceptance. The officers recognized her immediately. A few exchanged glances, uncertain. One of them, a young woman in uniform, stood and approached gently. "Miss Khanna, we didn't expect you to come." Amara nodded. "I'm not here to defend myself. I just need to tell the truth." The woman studied her for a moment, the dark circles under her eyes, the streaks of dried rain on her cheeks. "You exposed a lot of people last night. You'll have to make a full statement." "I will," Amara said quietly. "But please tell me about Rayan." The officer hesitated. "He's in the hospital. He's alive." Amara's breath caught, hope flooding her chest so suddenly it almost hurt. "Alive? Barely. The bullet missed his heart, but there's damage. He's unconscious." Amara closed her eyes. For the first time in 2 days, she felt her knees weaken, not from pain, but from relief. "Can I see him?" The officer hesitated again, then nodded. "He's under guard, but I'll see what I can do." The hospital was quiet, the kind of silence that only comes after chaos. The faint beeping of machines echoed through the white corridors as Amara walked down the hallway, her reflection following her in the sterile glass panels. When she entered the room, the air seemed to stop moving. Rayan lay there, pale and still, tubes running from his arms, his chest rising and falling weakly with each breath. Machines blinked quietly beside him, fragile proof that he was still alive. Amara stood at the doorway for a long time before daring to approach. When she finally sat beside him, her hands trembled as she reached out, brushing his fingers gently. "I thought I lost you," she whispered. He didn't answer, of course, but she kept speaking because silence, for once, felt unbearable. "I thought revenge would make me strong. I thought it would make them pay. But all it did was turn me into the same kind of person they were, cold, blind, selfish." Her voice cracked. "You were right, Rayan. I didn't win anything. I just lost differently." A tear slid down her cheek and fell onto his hand. She didn't wipe it away. The visit 2 days later, her parents were transferred to a holding facility while investigations continued. The authorities arranged for one short visit. She almost refused it. Almost. But something inside her, maybe guilt, maybe exhaustion, made her go. They sat on opposite sides of a glass wall. Rajesh looked frail, his hands trembling slightly. Mira's eyes were red, her face tired. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mira leaned forward, her voice barely audible through the speaker. "Amara, are you happy now?" Amara stared at her. "No," Rajesh sighed, rubbing his temples. "You destroyed everything." Amara's eyes hardened. "No, father. You built it on lies. I just stopped pretending." They looked at each other for a long time, all the unsaid words suspended in the air. Then, quietly, Amara added, "I came here to say I forgive you." Her father blinked, confused. "Forgive us after everything?" "Yes," she took a slow breath. "Because if I don't, I'll never be free. I won't forget what you did, but I won't let it own me anymore." Mira began to cry, softly, almost soundlessly. "We failed you," she whispered. "And you became everything we couldn't be, brave enough to face us." Amara smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Brave? No, just tired." The guard gestured that time was up. Before standing, Amara looked at them one last time. "You taught me silence. Now I'm learning peace." Then she turned and walked away, leaving her parents staring after her through the glass, the reflection of a daughter they could no longer claim but could finally understand. The letter that was never sent final closure. Weeks passed. The media storm faded. The case continued in court. Rayan slowly recovered, weak but alive. And Amara, she moved into a small coastal town, far from the city, where the only sound at night was the sea whispering against the shore. She lived quietly, teaching art to local children, her sketchbook once again filled with drawings, not of vengeance, but of forgiveness. One evening, she sat by the window and took out an old box, the one filled with letters she had written to her parents. She read one, smiled sadly, and for the first time didn't cry. Then she took out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. "Dear Mom and Dad, I don't know what comes next. Maybe time will heal, maybe it won't. But I'm learning to live with the silence you left behind. And maybe, someday, it will turn into peace. I don't hate you anymore. I don't need you to say sorry, because I've already forgiven you. Love, Amara." She folded the letter and placed it in a small glass jar, then buried it in the sand outside her cottage. A quiet burial for all the words she'd carried too long. Final scene, the beach of forgiveness as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Amara stood at the edge of the sea. The tide washed over her feet, gentle and cool. For the first time in her life, she wasn't thinking about the past, only the present, only the peace that comes after the storm. She looked at the horizon and whispered softly, "It's over." A seagull cried somewhere in the distance, and the wind carried her words away, toward the fading light. The waves rolled in again, erasing her footprints one by one, until it was as if she had never been there at all. But she had been, and that was enough. The wind outside whispered against the narrow apartment window as Ethan Hale sat at his desk, the dim bulb above flickering with a tired hum. His fingers paused over the yellowed envelope in his hand. It had arrived that morning. No return address, only a single embossed line of gold lettering across the front. "Hale family reunion, you're invited." For a long time, Ethan didn't move. He just stared at it. That last name, Hale, had once felt like a brand, something seared into his skin, impossible to wash away. It had been 7 years since he'd heard from his parents. 7 years since they'd turned their backs on him right after his graduation, pretending like he'd never existed. He remembered that day vividly, his father's cold voice echoing across the porch. "You're on your own now, Ethan. We've done enough." And just like that, the door had closed. Now they wanted him back. Ethan turned the envelope over, fingers tracing the gold seal, the family crest. The image of a phoenix rising from ashes mocked him. He gave a quiet, bitter laugh. "Rising from ashes, right," he muttered under his breath. "If only." Inside his chest, something old began to stir, a mixture of anger, confusion, and curiosity. Why now? Why after all this time? He ripped the seal open. Inside was a cream-colored card, printed in expensive ink. The reunion would be held at Hale Manor, the family's ancestral estate, a sprawling mansion perched on the cliffs outside Ravenswood. He hadn't been there since he was 18. The place had been beautiful then, but cold, a house of marble hearts and unspoken judgments. At the bottom of the invitation, one line caught his eye. "Attendance expected. Family only. Expected, not invited. That was so like them. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to the dusty photo frame on his desk. A faded picture of his younger self standing between his parents. His father's arm had been rigid around him, his mother's smile fixed and distant. He remembered thinking that maybe, one day, they'd be proud of him. That maybe, one day, he'd be enough. Now he wasn't sure he cared. Hours later, as rain began to fall outside, Ethan sat by the window with a cigarette burning low between his fingers. The smoke curled upward like ghosts whispering memories he didn't want to face. He could almost hear his mother's voice, soft, rehearsed, polite. "You always have a choice, Ethan. But remember, choices have consequences." He exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I remember, Mom." He crushed the cigarette in the ashtray, stood, and stared at the invitation one last time before sliding it into his coat pocket. If they wanted him there, he'd go. But not as the broken son they had left behind. He'd go as the man who had rebuilt himself from their ashes. And this time, they would see what they had created. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, distant, foreboding. The reunion at Hale Manor was only 3 days away, and Ethan Hale was coming home. The road to Hale Manor twisted like a scar through the fog-drenched hills. Rain had turned the dirt to glass, the headlights of Ethan's old car slicing through the darkness like a reluctant blade. He hadn't seen the estate in 7 years, but even through the fog, the silhouette was unmistakable. Black stone walls rising high against a bruised sky, windows glowing faintly with amber light. The house looked alive, like it had been waiting for him. Ethan slowed the car and rolled to a stop before the iron gates. The Hale crest, a phoenix rising from fire, gleamed wet in the rain. He sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. His chest tightened. For all his defiance, for all his rehearsed anger, coming back here still hurt. "It's just a house," he muttered. "It's just a goddamn house." He pushed the door open. The cold air bit his face as the gates creaked, opening with mechanical obedience, as if recognizing the blood that ran in his veins. Inside the manor, Lydia Hale, Ethan's mother, stood before the grand mirror in the foyer, fastening her diamond earrings. Her reflection betrayed no age, no warmth, only the controlled grace of a woman who'd never allowed herself to break. Behind her, a maid adjusted a vase of white roses on the marble table. "Ma'am," the maid said softly, "it's nearly time. The guests are beginning to arrive." Lydia nodded, her eyes flicking toward the grand staircase. "And Mr. Hale?" "He's in the study, ma'am." A pause. "And the boy?" The maid hesitated. "If you mean Master Ethan, the driver just radioed. He's entered the gates." Lydia's hand froze midair. The earring clattered against the marble. "All ready," she whispered, more to herself than anyone. For a moment, emotion flickered in her eyes, a shadow of regret quickly buried. "Thank you, Clara, that'll be all." As the maid left, Lydia turned back to the mirror, whispering to her own reflection. "Let's see what kind of man you've become, Ethan." Ethan parked near the front steps. Rain hammered the stone like applause from ghosts. He stepped out, coat collar up, shoes splashing into shallow puddles. The manor loomed ahead, every window glowing, every light waiting for him. He hesitated at the base of the steps, eyes scanning the balcony, the carved angels at the corners, the flicker of chandelier light from within. Memories rushed back. His father's lectures, his mother's silences, the feeling of never being enough. He tightened his jaw and climbed the steps. The front doors opened before he could knock. Thomas Hale, his father, stood there, tall, stern, gray at the temples, but no less imposing. Their eyes met, and time folded. "You look older," Thomas said finally, his voice low and unreadable. "So do you," Ethan replied. "Guess that makes us even." A faint, humorless smile touched his father's lips. "Come in." The foyer was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers, oil portraits, the faint scent of polish and old secrets. Every step Ethan took echoed too loudly, like the house itself was listening. Guests were gathering in the main hall, cousins, uncles, investors, all dressed in silk and arrogance. Laughter drifted through the air, brittle and false. And then silence. Every head turned as Ethan entered. He could feel their stares, whispers curling like smoke behind their champagne glasses. Is that really him? After all these years, why would they invite him back? Ethan ignored them. His eyes found his mother at the far end of the hall. She stood beneath the chandelier, elegant and distant, their gazes locked. For a moment, she seemed ready to speak, but didn't. Ethan stepped closer, voice steady. "Hello, Mother." Her lips curved faintly. "Ethan, it's been a while." "It has," she said softly. 7 years to be exact. But who's counting?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned, gesturing toward the grand dining room where laughter resumed like a performance restarting after intermission. "Come," she said. "Your family, after all." The word family hit him like a knife wrapped in silk. As Ethan followed her, he glanced up at the massive portrait above the staircase, his father, mother, and himself at age 12. His own painted smile looked forced, frozen forever in a lie. He wondered if the artist had seen the truth even then. Something in his gut told him this reunion wasn't about reconciliation. It was about something else, something that had been waiting for years to surface. And tonight, the Hale family secrets were ready to rise from the ashes. The grand dining hall of Hale Manor shimmered with old-world opulence, long velvet curtains, chandeliers dripping with gold, and a table set with silver so polished it caught the reflection of every flickering candle flame. But beneath the beauty, the air was thick, heavy with the unspoken weight of history. At the far end of the table sat Thomas Hale, patriarch and king of this crumbling empire. To his right, Lydia Hale, composed and silent, her smile like glass. And halfway down, among the murmuring cousins and half-interested uncles, sat Ethan, the ghost who had come home. The room had fallen quieter since he entered. Every word, every laugh seemed to hesitate before escaping anyone's lips. "It's been too long," Thomas said, breaking the silence as he lifted his wine glass. "Our family hasn't gathered like this in years." Ethan glanced around the table. His uncle Raymond avoided eye contact. His Aunt Vera smiled too brightly. No one said his name. "Guess it takes a ghost to bring the family back together," Ethan muttered. A soft chuckle came from one of his cousins, Mason, the youngest, barely 20 and still naive enough to find Ethan's rebellion amusing. But the rest of the table remained frozen. Thomas set his glass down carefully. "We invited you, Ethan, because it's time to put the past behind us." "You mean the part where you threw me out?" Ethan said calmly, cutting his steak with deliberate precision. "Yeah, hard to forget that." Lydia's voice floated in, calm but sharp as a blade. "Ethan, this isn't the time. It's the perfect time, Mother. Isn't that what reunions are for? Facing what we've all been pretending didn't happen." The silverware paused midair across the table. A storm of tension swirled between them, years of resentment packed into every syllable. Lydia exhaled softly, setting her napkin down. "You left on your own terms, Ethan." "No," he said, leaning forward. "You made sure I had no choice." The lightning outside flashed, illuminating the faces around him, pale and nervous. Thunder followed, a deep rumble that seemed to echo through the walls. Ethan's gaze moved slowly from one relative to another. "Funny thing is," he said, "you all acted like I never existed. Not a message, not a word. But now I'm invited back, and I can't help but wonder why." Thomas's jaw tensed. "You're still suspicious. You always were. When you grow up in a house full of secrets," Ethan said, "you learn to listen to what isn't said." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. At that moment, Lydia rose gracefully, her tone switching to hostess warmth. "Let's not ruin a beautiful evening," she said. "After dinner, we have an announcement, something important to the future of the Hale family." The room buzzed again, cautious, curious. Ethan's eyes narrowed. An announcement. That was new. He leaned back, watching her as she glided toward her seat again. Her posture was perfect, but her fingers trembled slightly as she picked up her glass. Later, as dessert arrived, Ethan caught a faint whisper between two maids near the door. "They haven't told him yet. Are you sure he's ready for it?" His gut tightened. He turned to his mother, voice low. "So what is this big announcement?" Her smile didn't falter. "You'll know soon enough." Thomas raised his glass again. "To family," he said, "and to what lies ahead." Glasses clinked, but the sound was hollow, like bones knocking together in the dark. Ethan looked around the table again, and for the first time he noticed something strange. A missing seat. One extra chair untouched at the far corner. a place setting perfectly arranged, but no one sat there. "Who's that for?" he asked. The chatter dimmed. No one answered. Even Lydia's expression faltered just for a heartbeat. Thomas cleared his throat. "It's tradition," Ethan smirked. "Tradition, right." He didn't push it, not yet. But as thunder rolled outside and the candles flickered, Ethan knew one thing for certain: this wasn't just a family reunion. It was an execution in slow motion, and he was sitting right in the center of it. The storm hadn't stopped. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rolled like a warning whispered through the bones of Hale Manor. It was well past midnight. The laughter, the fake smiles, the toasts to family, all of it had finally died. The house slept, but Ethan couldn't. He lay awake in the guest room they'd given him, a lavish, sterile space that smelled of polish and memory. The flickering fire painted his walls gold, but the warmth never reached him. That empty chair at dinner still haunted him. Who had it been for? And why did everyone pretend not to notice? He sat up, heart restless. The silence of Hale Manor wasn't peaceful. It was alive. He could hear the faint hum of air through vents, the soft creak of floorboards above, and the occasional shudder of the wind against the glass. Then, a sound. Faint, distant, but real. A click, like a door unlocking. Ethan stood slowly. He slipped into the hallway, the floor cold beneath his bare feet. Candlelight trembled from the sconces as he moved past the portraits of his ancestors, every painted face seeming to watch him pass. Downstairs, the grand clock struck 2. He followed the sound down the main corridor, past the old library and the study his father used to forbid him from entering. At the end of the hall, a door stood ajar. It wasn't supposed to be there. Ethan frowned. He had grown up in this house, he knew every room, every passage. But this door hadn't existed before. A chill prickled down his spine. Still, he pushed it open. The room beyond was small and dark, the air thick with dust and disuse. The faint scent of candle wax lingered, recently burned. On the far wall hung a massive portrait covered with a black cloth. Beneath it, a table, and on that table, a photo frame faced downward. Ethan hesitated, then lifted the frame. His blood ran cold. It was a family photo, his parents, himself, and a girl. A girl about his age with the same eyes, smiling between them like she belonged there. But Ethan had no sister. The name engraved on the frame read, "Elena Hale, forever with us." His throat went dry. He whispered her name aloud. It felt foreign, yet familiar. "Elena," behind him, the floor creaked. Ethan spun, nothing, just the long, empty corridor. He turned back to the portrait and reached for the cloth. Slowly, he pulled it down. The candlelight caught her painted face, the same girl, standing beside him in what looked like a garden. Her smile was warm, her eyes alive. But what froze him wasn't her face. It was the date at the bottom corner of the frame, the artist's signature, and the year. 2002. The year before Ethan was born. His hands trembled. He stumbled back, heart pounding in his chest. The room seemed to breathe with him, air pulsing, floor groaning, the candle flickering violently. Then a whisper, soft, female, close. "You shouldn't have come back." The candle died. The darkness swallowed everything. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He turned toward the sound, barely breathing. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a faint breath at his ear. "They didn't tell you about me." He backed into the door, heart racing, fingers fumbling for the handle. But before he could open it, something cold brushed his hand, light as silk, unmistakably human. He yanked the door open and stumbled out into the hall, slamming it shut behind him. When he looked back, the door was gone, nothing but smooth wallpaper. He stood there for what felt like forever, chest heaving, mind spinning. A sister. A secret. A room that shouldn't exist. The Hale family reunion wasn't about reconciliation. It was about resurrection. And Ethan was beginning to realize he wasn't the only child his parents had abandoned.